We are at the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park, where it is our vision to be a dynamic cultural center for community learning. I'm Deb W. Hammond, the Literature Chair, and we have 30 programs in our enrichment series, which are part of our mission to strengthen our communities through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. But we are very fortunate to have Debra Miller of Historical Women of Letters return to the 19th with today's program, Agatha Christie, A Body of Evidence. Debra is a graduate of Michigan State University Department of Theater. She's a professional actress, vocalist, and voiceover talent who has toured the country with various productions and appeared in Chicago theater productions. In 2010, she created her own company focused on writing and producing one-woman plays in which she portrays important historical figures, mostly authors, Jane Austen, Beatrix Potter, Mary Shelley, Louisa May Alcott, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and Mary Todd Lincoln. And Debra still works in Chicago theaters. She is here today bringing Agatha Christie to life. Back in the spring of 1950, the author accompanied her husband, archeologist Max Mallowan, to Iran and the tales of Kalhu, the ancient city of Nimrud. We join Agatha Christie in Beit Agatha as she reminisces about her childhood, her life as a writer and an adventurer, and contemplates beginning her biography, her autobiography, a project that would take her 20 years. So let's welcome Debra Ann Miller, or Agatha Christie.
Well, this is unexpected. Quite unexpected indeed. Welcome to Tel Kalhu, Nimrud. I'm happy to have you here, but I'm afraid that you have come too soon. The digging doesn't even begin until next week, so there is nothing to see at the site, just the mound. Although the landscape is incredibly lovely, with the blue hills to the north and all around tiny spring flowers of scarlet and yellow that will vanish overnight when the Bedouin come down from the hills with their cattle as they eat their way south. Just now we are all busy, unpacking and making preparations for the season. This is our expedition house. It has a kitchen, living and dining room, a small office, workroom, drawing office, a large store and pottery room, and a miniature dark room. We all sleep in tents. This room is new. When I arrived, Max had a square card affixed next to the door which read in cuneiform, Beit Agatha, Agatha's house. Not quite as small as the dark room, with a door and window that refuse to stay shut, but I have a fairly sturdy table, a cupboard, which will never be effective in keeping the dust from my typewriter, and a gaily painted tin box in which to keep my transcript as it progresses. I ought to be writing a detective story. Crooked House came out nearly a year ago, which is one of my special favorites, so I kept it for years, thinking about it, working it out, telling myself one day, when I've got plenty of time and want to really enjoy myself, I will begin it. Writing Crooked House was pure pleasure. Oh, and I have a Miss Marple coming in June, the first in 10 years. I think it is possible that Miss Marple arose from the pleasure I had taken in portraying Dr. Shepherd's sister, Caroline, in the murder of Roger Ackroyd. She'd been my favourite character in the book, an acidulated spinster full of curiosity, knowing everything, hearing everything. The complete detective service in the home. Miss Jane Marple is rather like one of my grandmother's Ealing cronies. She is in no way a picture of my grandmother. She is far more fussy and spinsterish than my grandmother ever was. But she does share one thing in common with her. Though a cheerful person, she always expected the worst of everyone and everything, and was, with alarming accuracy, usually proved right. I must return to London in June for the book's launch. Apparently, it is my 50th book, and I must deliver whatever comes next while I am there. I ought to be writing whatever comes next. But with a writer's natural urge to write anything but what he should be writing, I long, quite unexpectedly, to write my autobiography. Autobiography is far too grand a term. It implies a purposeful study of one's whole life. I intend no such task. What I plan to do is enjoy the pleasures of memory, not hurrying. It is an indulgence. Until one looks back at one's past, one fails to recognize what an extraordinary view of the world a child has. Do you know that I distinctly remember my 3rd birthday? We're having tea in the garden, and there is a tea table, and it is covered in cakes. And with my birthday cake, all sugar icing, and with candles, 3 candles. And then the exciting occurrence. A red spider, so small I can hardly see it, runs across the white tablecloth, and my mother says, "It is a lucky spider, Agatha. A lucky spider for your birthday." And then the memory fades, except for a fragmentary reminiscence of an interminable argument sustained by my brother as to how many eclairs he shall be allowed to eat. One of the luckiest things that can happen to you in life is to have a happy childhood. My father and mother loved each other dearly and made a success of their marriage and of parenthood. My father was a very agreeable man, a quality not much stressed nowadays. By modern standards, my father would probably not be well thought of. It was the days of independent means, and if you had an independent income, you didn't work. You weren't expected to. He spent his days at the cricket club, had an enormous number of friends, and loved to entertain them. There was one large dinner party at our home every week, and he and mother would go out to dine 2 or 3 times a week. My mother was an enigmatic and arresting personality, more forceful than my father, startlingly original in her ideas, shy and miserably diffident about herself, and I think at bottom with a natural melancholy. She had a good deal of unhappiness in her childhood. My grandfather had been thrown from his horse, and my grandmother left a widow with 4 children at the age of 27. Her elder sister offered to adopt one of the children to bring up as her own. Of the 3 boys and 1 girl, my grandmother chose Clara, my mother, and she was sent to the north of England. My mother was deeply miserable in her new life, but took real solace in the periodic visits of her aunt's stepson, Fred Miller, and he was especially kind to his new little cousin. He kept the childish letters and poems she wrote. She embroidered a pocketbook for him, which incidentally he carried all his life. He was 10 years older than she, and after a long series of flirtations with social beauties and witty girls in New York, he went back to England to ask the quiet little cousin to be his wife. I have little recollection of my brother and sister as children. I presume that is because they were away at school. My mother was considered go-ahead for sending her daughter to a boarding school, and my father broad-minded to allow it. In our family it was my sister, Madge, who was early recognized as the clever one. Her head mistress at Brighton urged that she continue her education, but my father would not have Madge turned into a bloop stocking. And so she was sent to Paris to be finished. My brother, Monty, a year younger than Madge and 10 years older than me, had enormous personal charm, a liking for literature, but was otherwise intellectually backward. I think my parents realized that he was going to be the difficult one. I myself was always seen as the slow one. It was quite true, and I accepted it. My mother and sister were very quick. I could never keep up. I was very inarticulate. I found it difficult to assemble into words what I wanted to say. Before Madge was born, my parents went to Torquay, then a fashionable winter resort. My father liked it so much he decided not to make his home in America, but instead to stay, aided in his decision by the occurrence of my mother buying a house because she liked it. Ashfield was not on the fashionable side of Torquay, but at the older end of town, and it has been my home off and on nearly all my life. I had few childhood playmates. Almost all of them were make-believe from as early as I can remember. The first lot were the kittens. Ah, that helps. I don't recall who the kittens were or whether or not I myself was a kitten. From the kittens, I passed on to Mrs. Green. Now, Mrs. Green had 100 children, of which the important ones were Poodle, Squirrel, and Tree. These three accompanied me on all of my exploits in the garden. They were not quite children and not quite dogs, but some intermediate creature between the two. Nursey was too old to play with me, and too wise to talk to me about my games. Granny, on the other hand, was an indulgent playmate. Whenever Mother and I would visit her at Ealing, she would be all too willing to lay aside the letter she was writing and enter into the delightful pastime of a chicken from Mr. Whiteley's. Needless to say, I was the chicken. Selected by Granny with appeals to the shopman as to whether I was really young and tender, brought home, trussed up, skewered, accompanied by yells of delight from my skewered self, put in the oven, done to a turn, with a great show being made of sharpening the carving knife, when suddenly the chicken comes alive. It's me! Grand climax, to be repeated ad lib. On my 5th birthday, I was given a dog. It was the most shattering thing that ever happened to me. Such unbelievable joy, I was unable to utter a word. I couldn't even say thank you. I could hardly even look at my beautiful dog. Instead, I turned away from him. I needed urgently to be alone to come to terms with this incredible happiness. I think it was the lavatory to which I retired. Yes, because I closed the heavy mahogany seat and sat gazing unseeingly at the map of Torquay on the opposite wall. I have a dog. A dog. It is a dog of my own. My very own dog. My mother told me later that my father had been very much disappointed in my reception of his gift, but my mother, always understanding, told him I just needed a little time. She can't quite take it in yet. Inarticulate I shall always be. I suppose it is one of the causes that have made me a writer. Do you know that I have seen my grandson Matthew do the same thing? He was two and a half, I suppose. He was walking very carefully down the stairs. It was a new achievement, and he was quite proud of it, although still somewhat scared. He was walking down the stairs, muttering to himself, "This is Matthew going downstairs." stairs. This is Matthew. Matthew is going downstairs. Talking to oneself seems to be a family trait. I hope it doesn't cause him trouble when he goes to school. School, as such, was never a part of my childhood, except for playing school with my imaginary friends. Oh, there were dancing classes, which I attended once a week. I learned the polka, the hornpipe, and the dreaded waltz. My mother had gone to school as a child, and of course sent Madge to boarding school. She was now entirely converted to the view that the best way to bring up young girls was to let them run wild as much as possible, give them good food, fresh air, and that they should not be allowed to learn to read until the age of 8. On this point, I disappointed my mother. A distressed nursie, for she was obliged to inform my mother that I had taught myself to read at 3 or 4. I was therefore allowed to read as much as I pleased. And when I was 7 or 8, the delights of the world of music were opened to me by Fraulein Uda. Before long, the house resounded with scales, arpeggios, and in due course, strains of the merry peasant. I enjoyed music immensely and would practice with zeal an hour or two a day. And I did arithmetic with my father. I showed an aptitude for figures early on, and proudly passing from fractions to decimals, found it quite enthralling. My father died when I was 11. He suffered from a series of what were supposed to be heart attacks, a vague term which covered just about everything. His health got slowly worse, and there was no doubt that constant financial worry weakened his resistance to illness of any kind. He caught a bad chill, and double pneumonia developed. Life took on a completely different complexion after my father's death. Monty obtained a commission in regular regiment after the South African War, and he went directly from there to India. Madge married James Watts 9 months after father's death. We were no longer the Millers, a family. And I knew for the first time what it was to feel anxiety for other people. I would wake at night, my heart beating, sure that my mother was dead. 12 or 13 can be a natural time for anxiety. I suppose I've always been overburdened with imagination. It has served me well in my profession. It can give you some bad sessions in other respects. We were badly off and had to economize in every way. We kept the house, but the servants were reduced. Mother no longer gave luncheons or dinner parties. I read an enormous quantity of books. The Prisoner of Zenda and all of Jules Verne in French. By way of lessons, I learned the names of the kings of England and the names of all of their wives. Information that has never been of much use to me. Every day I had to learn to spell pages of words. I suppose the exercise did me some good, although I was still an extraordinarily bad speller, and have remained so to the present day. A decided disadvantage when one chooses writing as one's career. I did appear in print at the age of 11. The trams came to Ealing, and local opinion erupted into fury as everyone wrote to the press, their MPs, everyone they could think to write to, but still the trams came. I wrote a poem on the first day of the running of the trams. It was printed in the local newspaper. I can still remember the first verse. When first electric trams did run in all their scarlet glory, 'twas well, but ere the day was done, that was another story. There were 4 verses of it. I was elated at seeing myself in print, but I cannot say that it led me to contemplate a literary career. My mother read Dickens aloud to me at this point, and we both enjoyed it. Our first Dickens was Nicholas Nickleby, and my favourite character was the old gentleman who courted Mrs. Nickleby by throwing vegetable marrows over the wall. Can this be one of the reasons why I made Hercule Poirot retire to grow vegetable marrows? Who can say? It was at about this time that my mother decided that perhaps, after all, I had better have some schooling. So I was sent to a school in Torquay for a year and a half, when my mother, with her usual suddenness, announced that I would go to Paris. The 2 winters and 1 summer I spent in Paris were some of the happiest days of my life. I studied both piano and singing in Paris, but would lose my nerve completely whenever I had to play for a school concert. If I had to sing, I felt no such nervousness. There are people in the world who perform better in public than they do in private, and there are people who are just the opposite. I am the latter. Soon after I returned from Paris, my mother suffered from a serious illness which was diagnosed as appendicitis, paratyphoid, gallstones, and a few more things. Treatment did not improve her condition, and my mother was losing her patience. She finally found a more biddable doctor who prescribed sunshine and warm climate, and my mother announced that we would go to Egypt. I was now of an age to come out, owing to the fact that we were badly off. I think my mother realized that it was going to be difficult for me to enter society under the usual terms. Her choice of Cairo as a convalescent center for herself was made largely, I think, on my behalf, and it was a good one. Cairo, from the point of view of a young girl, was dream of delight. I went to 5 dances a week, and there was polo every day. I was 17. I was fond of dancing and danced well. Also, I liked young men, and soon found that they liked me. However, I never fell even slightly in love. I had too much to do. I became mad for polo and would watch it every day. My mother tried to broaden my mind by occasionally taking me to the museum, but the wonders of antiquity were the last thing I cared to see. I am very glad she did not press when I refused to go to Luxor. The beauties of Egypt were to come upon me with wonderful impact about 20 years later. How it would have spoiled them for me if I'd seen them with unappreciative eyes. I returned from Egypt, having learnt to be social, although still incredibly shy. Now my life filled up with hunting weekends and house parties. I went up in a plane in 1911 and wrote poetry. I suppose everyone did at my age. Some of the earliest examples are incredibly awful. But by 17 or 18, I was doing better. I wrote a series of poems on the Harlequin legend. I sent some of them to the Poetry Review, won a Guinea prize. After that, I sent several poems to them, won several prizes, and had 1 or 2 poems printed there. One particularly unpleasant winter's day, I was lying in bed, recovering from influenza. I was bored. My mother looked in. Why don't you write a story, like Madge? Oh, I don't think that I could. You don't know that you can't because you've never tried. 5 minutes later, she returned with an exercise book in her hand. You can begin your story now. I don't know how long it took me to complete. I believe it was finished by the following evening. I had started out hesitatingly, but once I'd hit on an acceptable topic, found myself going along at a great rate. That first story was called House of Beauty. It is no masterpiece, but it showed promise. Amateurishly written, of course, and showing the influence of all that I had read the week before. But though the style was derivative, the plot showed promise. After that, I wrote several stories. The Call of Wings, The Lonely God, a dialogue between a deaf lady and a nervous man at a party. Oh, and a grisly story about a seance. I typed all of those up on Madge's own typewriter and hopefully sent them off to some magazines. They all returned promptly, with the usual slip, "The editor regrets." Then I packaged them back up and sent them off to some other magazines. I even tried my hand at a novel set in Cairo, heavily overburdened with too much plot. It dashes madly from one set of characters to another. I called it, and I can't imagine why, Snow Upon the Deserts. It was at about this time that my sister Madge and I had a conversation that was to bear fruit later. We were discussing some detective story. Mystery of the Yellow Room, I think. It was a particularly baffling mystery, well worked out and planned. Madge and I are connoisseurs of the detective story. She initiated me young to Sherlock Holmes, recounting the Leavenworth case to me when I was 8. I said, I should like to try my hand at a detective story. "Oh, I don't think you could do it. They're very difficult to do. I've thought about it." "Well, I should like to try." "Well, but you couldn't," said Madge. It was never a definite bet. The terms had never been laid out, but the words had been said. In late autumn of 1912, the Cliffords of Chudley were giving a dance, and as a courtesy to the young ladies of the area, had invited several of the officers who were stationed nearby at Exeter. I got a letter from an old friend, Arthur Griffiths, a local vicar's son and a soldier, a gunner. He said he would not be attending the dance, but there's a fellow from our mess going, Christie by name, so look out for him, she's a good dancer. We were introduced. Got along fairly well, danced several dances with him. A week or 10 days later, I was having tea with the Mallows at the house opposite ours, when I was called to the telephone. It was my mother. "Come home at once, will you, Agatha? There's one of your young men here. I don't know him. Never seen him before. Well, I've given him tea, but he seems to keep staying. On and on, hoping to see you." I was cross at going home. I was enjoying myself. I stormed into the drawing room and a young man stood up. He was a tall, fair young man with crisp curly hair, a turned-up nose, and a look of relief. I was intensely surprised. Well, it never occurred to me that I would see Griffith's friend, young Christie, again. I think he was afraid I shouldn't remember him. He said he had ridden over to Torquay on his motorbike and thought he might as well look me up. He avoided mentioning that he must have gone to a certain amount of trouble in finding out my address from Arthur Griffiths. He stayed for dinner. We had a lovely evening, and then Archie got back on his motorbike and in a series of explosive bumps went back to Exeter. For the next 10 days, he made frequent and unexpected appearances. He told me all about himself, how he was waiting impatiently to be accepted into the newly formed Royal Flying Corps. 2 days after the New Year, Archie appeared to say that he would be leaving in 2 days' time, going to Salisbury Plain to start his flying corps training. Then he said fiercely, "You've got to marry me! You've got to marry me!" Well, of course, I told him it was impossible. And my mother was firm. "What have you got to get married on?" We were engaged. It lasted 1.5 years, and it was a tempestuous time. Every now and then we would be overcome with waves of despair, and one or the other of us would write to break it off. Then about a week later, we would find that we could no longer bear it, and we would be back on old terms again. I don't recall in 1913 having any anticipation of war. All the same, first aid and home nursing courses were popular. We all attended these, bandaged each other's arms and legs, passed our exams, and got a small printed card to prove our success. Then far off in Serbia, an archduke was assassinated. It seemed such a faraway incident. That it should touch us in England seemed incredible. No civilized nations went to war, hadn't happened in years, probably never happen again. Then one morning, it had happened. England was at war. The Flying Corps were among the first to be mobilized, and Archie with them. We had half an hour together, and he was gone. I occupied myself at the voluntary aid dispensary. We made a lot of bandages and baskets full of swabs for the hospitals. Some of the things we did were useful, but most of them were of no use at all. But they passed the time, and soon, grimly soon, our first casualties began to arrive. Those first cases came straight from the trenches with their field dressings on and their heads full of lice. We had a case of tetanus in our first batch. It was our first death. It came as a shock to all of us. But in 3 weeks' time, I felt as though I had been nursing soldiers all my life. 3 days before the Christmas of 1914, Archie suddenly got leave. I travelled to London to meet him, and then he and I were to go on to his parents' home. It had only been 3 months since we'd seen each other, but those 3 months had been acted out in another dimension in time. We both lived a large tract on our own. But the result was that we met almost as strangers. While a good many people were getting married, Archie was determined that rushing into things was entirely wrong. I argued passionately on the other side, but Archie was certain. 3 nights later, he tapped upon my door and said with equal certainty, "You've got to marry me. At once. We'll marry tomorrow, Christmas Eve, so that's all right?" I was tongue-tied. After a good deal of rushing about and debates over special licenses, we found the vicar, hurried to the church where the organist who was practicing offered to play the wedding march just before the ceremony was to begin. I thought for one sad moment, no bride had ever taken less trouble over her appearance. No white dress, no veil. Not even a smart frock. I had not even had time to wash my hands and face. We decided to spend the night at the Grand Hotel of Torquay, and Christmas Day with my mother. I had first, of course, to ring her up to announce what had happened. The day after Christmas, I accompanied Archie back to London to say goodbye. I would not see him for another 6 months of war. I returned to the hospital and was transferred to a new department, the dispensary. I was to assist Mrs. Ellis while I studied for my apothecary hall examination. The dispensary was to be my home from home for the next 2 years. It was while working there that I first conceived my detective story. It had remained in my mind since Madge's challenge. Since I was surrounded by poisons, perhaps it was only natural that death by poisoning should be my choice for cause of death. But who could I have as a detective? There was Sherlock Holmes, the one and only. I should never be able to emulate him. And the young journalist Rouletabille from The Mystery of the Yellow Room. Then I thought about our Belgian refugees. With quite a colony of them living in the parish, why not make my detective a Belgian? He would be meticulous. Oh, I could see him, a tidy little man, always arranging things, and he should be very brainy with little grey cells of the mind. He should be a small man with a grand name. Zeus, Hercules. I don't know why I settled on Poirot. It didn't go well with Hercules, but with Hercule. Hercule Poirot, a refugee retired police officer. What a mistake I made there. Well, the result is that my fictional detective must be over 100 by now. Bits of my detective story rattled about in my head. When I began writing, I got bogged down in the middle part. The complications got the better of me. My mother suggested that I go away for summer holiday, to write where I wouldn't be disturbed. I decided to go to Dartmoor, where I finished the book, well, the first draft, over that fortnight's holiday. I rewrote a few stilted chapters and sent it off to a publisher, Harder and Stoughton, who returned it. When Archie came home for second leave, I told him all about my book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I'd sent it off to several publishers, but it always returned the same. The editor regrets. John Lane, the Bodley Head, had recently published a few detective stories. I thought I might as well give them a try. Sent it off to them, forgot all about it. Because Archie was stationed at the Air Ministry in London. So for the first time since our marriage, we would be together. We moved to London. The war was still going on and everything was scarce. And I was lonely. I missed my mother, the hospital, my friends. I started a course in bookkeeping and shorthand to occupy my days. The war ended, and in less than a year, our Rosalind was born. And Archie got a job in town. To tell the truth, I'd forgotten all about the mysterious affair at Styles. By this time, it must have been with Bodley Head for nearly 2 years. One day I got a letter asking me to call at their offices in connection with a manuscript I had sent, and I was shown into John Lane's office. He had a benign, kindly manner, and shrewd blue eyes which ought to have warned me. He said, the novel showed promise but would need significant changes, specifically the last chapter, then written as a court scene, would need to be rewritten, perhaps in another location. Oh, I readily agreed. He then produced from his desk drawer an agreement which he suggested I sign. The idea of having a book in print went straight to my head. I think I would have signed anything. I don't think I could have made a worse deal. I made £25 on that first book, and that was only because John Lane had sold the serial rights to the Weekly Times for 50, and I was bound to the Bodley for the next 4 books. My grandmother had died, and my mother was living alone at Ashfield, which was in horrible want of repair. Archie and I had a row over Mother keeping the house. Well, do something about it then. We haven't got any money. Well, write something then. I got round John Lane and Bodley Head by selling serial rights to short stories to the magazines and weeklies myself. I still offered them my next 4 books. What they did with them is entirely up to them. They got The Secret Adversary and Murder on the Links before Archie and I left on a tour round the world. It was great fun. And a terrible going. Archie had been contacted by an old schoolmaster, Major Belcher, who had bluffed and blustered his way into leading a world tour in advance of the British Empire Exposition. He hired Archie as his financial advisor. South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, then a month's holiday. Archie and I went to Honolulu and surfed until we were burnt to a crisp. Then Canada, then home. Going around the world was the most exciting thing I'd ever done. I could hardly believe it was true. I kept saying to myself, I'm going round the world. Rather like my grandson Matthew. This is Agatha. Agatha is going round the world. Belcher was a bully and prone to towering rages when things did not go his way. He insisted that I put him in one of my books. He had invited Archie and I to his home, the Mill House, which he thought would make a jolly good title for a book, Mystery of the Mill House, or Mystery in the Mill House. He was quite distressed when I finally got around to writing it because I made him the victim. I don't want to be the victim. I want to be the murderer. Of course, Sir Eustace Pedlar is not Belcher, but he uses several of Belcher's phrases, and he too is a master of the art of the bluff. Things were going well for Archie and I. We bought a car. It is the thing that has excited me most. The only thing that could top it would be dining with the Queen. We bought a house. Archie suggested we call it Styles. The Mystery of the Mill House had been renamed The Man in the Brown Suit, and then renamed and sold as a serial as Anna the Adventuress. Archie had work he enjoyed and spent his weekends golfing. I was lonely, but writing. I had just settled in with my new publisher, William Collins, and my first book for them was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. So it was success all along the line. The next year of my life is one I hate recalling. My mother caught bronchitis, had it very badly. Archie was away in Spain, Rosalind was at boarding school, so Madge and I took turns going to Ashfield to care for her. Rosalind sent for me unexpectedly, and my mother died before I could arrive. Archie returned after the funeral. I'd always known he had a violent dislike for illness, death, or trouble of any kind. He suggested that I go back to Spain with him. It'd be great fun and it would distract you. I didn't want to be distracted. I wanted to be with my sorrow and learn to get used to it. I chose to go to Ashfield to clear out the accumulation of 47 years. I worked myself to exhaustion. Forgot to eat, forgot to sleep, forgot my name. Archie could not come down from London and I could not go to him. He finally came in August for Rosalind's birthday. We were to celebrate and then Archie and I were to go to Spain. But when he arrived, it just wasn't Archie. We did not go to Spain. Archie asked for divorce. So after illness came sorrow, heartbreak, and despair. No need dwelling on it. In February of the following year, Rosalind and I went to the Canary Islands. Managed to write the better part of The Mystery of the Blue Train there. Needed money badly now. I hadn't written a word since my mother died. I had no joy in writing it. I'd worked out the plot. I knew where I was going, but I could not see the scenes in my mind's eye. I was driven on by the necessity to write another book and make some money. It was then that I passed from amateur to professional. I assumed the burden of the profession, which is writing even when you don't want to, don't much like what you are writing, and aren't writing particularly well. I've always hated the mystery of the blue train. The divorce was final the following year. Then I knew I needed to get out of England for the winter. I was dining with Commander Howe and his wife when he suggested Baghdad. I was sceptical. Sea voyages had never been pleasant for me. You could go by train, the Orient Express. All my life, I had wanted to go on the Orient Express. Whenever I had seen it whenever I travelled to France or to Spain or Italy, I'd often seen it standing at Calais, and I longed to climb up into it. Oh, I was bitten. Commander Howe made a list of the places I should see. You must see Mosul, and you really should see Basra, and you really ought to visit I'd just been reading about Leonard Woolley's marvellous finds at The next day I got my tickets and my reservations for my journey. The Simplon Orient Express to Istanbul, from Istanbul to Damascus, and from Damascus to Baghdad across the desert. I would be travelling alone. Never had before. Didn't much want to at the time. But I thought, it's now or never. Either I cling to everything that is familiar and that I know, or I develop some initiative and try some things on my own. Trains had always been one of my favourite things. And until one travels alone, one does not realise how much the outside world will protect and befriend you. I spoke sporadic French to some Turkish ladies. A Dutch engineer gave me a tour of Istanbul. I rejoined the train, and at sunset we stopped to view the Cilician gates. It was a moment of incredible beauty. Not many people were allowed to visit the dig at but Catherine Woolley, Leonard Woolley's wife, had recently read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and was so enthusiastic that I was given the VIP treatment. I fell in love with its beauty in the evenings, the ziggurats standing up in the sunset. To see a dagger slowly appearing in the sand was romantic and filled me with a longing to be an archaeologist myself. I had to go home for Christmas, but I immediately began planning my next trip to Beirut. The Woolleys and I had agreed that after Beirut I would return to in the last week of their season, when the Woolleys would be packing up. From there we would travel together through Syria into Greece, and there to see Delphi. While the packing proceeded, it was decided that I should see Najaf and Kabbalah, accompanied by Max Mallowan, Leonard Woolley's assistant. I protested, but everyone seemed to think that it was perfectly natural that a young man who had worked hard on an enormous dig should sacrifice himself to drive a strange woman, a good many years older than him, to see the sights of the country. Max took it all as a matter of course. He said he enjoyed both cities and would not mind seeing them again. It was heaven. The car broke down, we got bogged in sand, slept in police cells, battled fleas, sang songs, swam in a desert lake of clear blue water. The car got bogged again. Max pulled out steel mats and shovel, but to no avail. I sat for hours in the sun and slept in the shade of the car until a member of the Desert Camel Corps arrived with help. Max told me later, whether truthful or not, that it was then that he began to think that I would make a good wife for him. No fuss. You didn't complain or say that it was all my fault or that we should have never stopped there. It was then, really, I began to think you were wonderful. Max was to accompany the Woolies and I from Aleppo to Athens, stopping at several ports along the way. At Mersin, Max and I went ashore and spent a happy day at the beach. He picked an enormous quantity of marigolds for me. I wove them into a chain and he hung them round my neck. At Athens, there was a pile of telegrams waiting for me, and my heart sunk. Rosalind had pneumonia. Madge had taken her out of school. The last telegram read that she was improving, but still very badly off. It was 1930. By Orient Express, it would take me 4 days to get back. Everyone was so kind. Max and Len Woolley went to the travelling office to make arrangements for me on the next evening's train. That evening, I wandered around Athens in a daze. I stepped into one of those square holes in a plaza where a tree had been and had sprained my ankle badly. Max disappeared. He returned with a plaster bandage and informed me that he would be accompanying me on my journey to help with my ankle. It was the most wonderful news. I thought then, and indeed have thought ever since, what a wonderful person Max is. I have little recollection of that journey with Max, except for his extraordinary kindness, tact, and sympathy. He managed to distract me by telling me a great deal about his own family. He bandaged my ankle repeatedly and helped me along to the dining car. 5 days later, I was by Rosalind's side. She was recovered, but still very weak. Max was to be working at the British Museum and hoped I would let him know when I was in London, which didn't seem likely, as I was settled at Ashfield while Rosalind recovered. And so we said goodbye. I'd followed up the murder of Roger Ackroyd with The Seven Dials Mystery, which I wrote as a sequel to my book, The Secret of Chimneys. I was gaining confidence in my writing now. I was certain I could produce 1 book a year and perhaps even a few short stories. As it happened, the Savoy was hosting a party which was being given by my publishers, William Collins. They expressly wanted me to attend for the purpose of meeting my American publishers. I invited Max to breakfast with me in London. I was delighted at the idea of seeing him again, but strangely, the moment he arrived, I was stricken with a sudden shyness. After the journey we had done together and the friendly terms on which we had been, I couldn't figure out why I was so completely paralyzed. Max was shy too, I think. But by the end of breakfast, we were back on old terms again, and I asked Max if he could stay with us in London, and we settled on a weekend that he could come. While in Devon with us, Max asked me to marry him. Of course, I couldn't. Marriage was the last thing I wanted to do again, and I was so much older than he. It wouldn't be fair to him. You ought to marry a nice young girl. Max left next day on the early train, and before he left, he said, "I think you will marry me, you know, once you've had plenty of time to think it over." He was right. We were married in a little chapel in Edinburgh with no reporters and no hint of the secret getting out. And I saw Delphi with Max on our honeymoon. By this time, I must have written 10 books at least. The funny thing is I have no recollection of any of the books I wrote just after my marriage. I suppose I was having so much fun in ordinary life that writing was just a task I performed in spells and bursts. Still, my output seems to have been really rather good. There's always a Christie for Christmas, and I can accompany Max on his digs and write anywhere, really. During the Second War, Max joined the Air Ministry and was stationed in North Africa. I volunteered at the dispensary again and wrote. It's only now, when I look back at my wartime output, that I realise that I produced an incredible amount of stuff during those years. Poems and detective novels, short stories. I even allowed myself the guilty pleasure of writing a few straight novels under the name Mary Westmacott, the secret I kept for almost 15 years. They sold well, were well reviewed. The third Westmacott, Absent in the Spring, is the one book that has satisfied me completely. I wrote that book in 3 days flat, went straight through. I don't think I have ever been so tired. But I didn't want to change a word of it. And of course I can't know what it is really like. It was written as I meant to write it. And that is the proudest joy an author can have. I've written a few plays, Akhenaten, and of course Black Coffee. I should like to have a go at a few more of those. You know, I have always been so disappointed in other people's adaptations of my books that perhaps I ought to try that. Three Blind Mice made a nice little radio play. I wonder if I could expand it into a 3-act thriller. I must remember to. Where's my notebook? Here. What's in there? There we are. Life is like sitting in a cinema. Flick, here I am, eating eclairs on my birthday as a child. Flick, it is 2 years later, and I am sitting on my grandmother's lap, trussed up like a chicken and nearly hysterical with the wit of the joke. Just moments, really. And in between, long, empty spaces of months or even years. Where was one then? It brings home the Peer Gynt's question. Where was I, myself, the whole man, the true man? One can never know the true man, but I think in flashes one can know the true man. I do not know the whole Agatha. The whole Agatha, so I believe, is known only to God. So there we are, all of us. Little Agatha Miller and big Agatha Miller, Agatha Christie and Agatha Mallowan, proceeding in our way. Where? That one does not know. Which, of course, makes life exciting. I've always thought life exciting and still do. So, having settled that, I had better perhaps begin. This is Agatha. Agatha is writing her autobiography. Thank you. Thank you very much. The name of my company is Historical Women of Letters, and I'm Debra Miller. And all of my other scripts are composed almost entirely from these women's journals and letters. But this script is different. Agatha Christie's letters and journals are not available to the public, so this was taken largely from her two autobiographies, the one that took her 20 years to complete, and another short memoir that she wrote called Come Tell Me How You Live, which is about her life with Max Mallowan and living and working in the digs. So if anybody has any questions, Deb would be more than happy to bring a microphone to you. I also have copies of the books, and if you took the timeline on the back table, on the back of it is a bibliography with her two autobiographies, and also there is a book called Agatha Christie's Secret Notebooks. They weren't really secret. When her grandson took was getting the house ready, Greenway ready for making it into a public space, he found a bunch of her notebooks. There were 72 of them, I think, and they just had to number them arbitrarily, because in any one of her notebooks you would find a treatment from 1926, then you would find names that she overheard in a restaurant in the 1950s. Then you would find cribbage notes, scores, and then maybe a shopping list, and then something from the 30s. She must have kept notebooks by her bedside, in her pocketbook, at her table, at her desk, so that whenever she had an idea, she would write it down, which all creative people will tell you, write it down, write it down, write it down, you will not remember. And that is probably why she was able to produce a book a year, even if she did not have an idea. She could go to one of her notebooks and go, oh yes, I remember that. Let's do that one this time. And off she would go. So, did you have a question?
I have a question. How long did it take you to develop this character, Agatha Christie?
How long did it take to do this? It takes a year. I start with a biography, try to find the best biography I can for context, because context is so important. And then I usually then I read their letters and their journals, because then I have an idea of where and when they are. And then when I'm reading the letters and journals, I still do it old school. 3x5 cards. I tried doing it with an Excel spreadsheet, but with the 3x5 cards, I can move them around. And in the course of reading, I'll decide on what day it should be. Like, this is the day she started her autobiography. So I'll decide what day or what time of her life it should be. And then I've got all of these 3x5 cards with where it was from, and then in the upper corner of the subject. And then I'll just start moving them around and moving them around and moving them around. And then I just add bridges or explanations, and then that gives me the story, and it's so much fun. And then I, of course, end up down crazy rabbit holes. I have learned more in the last 2 years about World War I than I ever learned when I was in school. Because in addition to doing Agatha Christie, I also do Beatrix Potter and Nellie Bly. And Nellie Bly was a reporter. She was embedded with the Hungarian soldiers during the First World War. So I had to learn all about the First World War again, because I had no idea. And you know how late it was that the Americans joined the war. And when Nellie Bly went over, she was embedded with the Hungarian soldiers, and the United States wasn't in the war at all. Well, they joined the Allied powers, and she was embedded with the Central powers. So when she wanted to come back to the United States, she had to go through a series of very rigorous interviews with generals and members of the Secret Service and everything else in order to prove her Americanism, so that she could get back into the United States. And that was a lot of fun to learn. I also learned that our time zones were created by the railroads, completely without any government blessing or even knowledge. They just needed to keep time, so they divided our country into 4 sections, and our time zone is actually based on Memphis time, just in case you wanted to know. Like I said, rabbit holes.
That was really wonderful. Am I imagining things? Wasn't there some mystery about some time in her life that, and if so, has anything come to light about that?
Agatha Christie did not write about the 10 days that she, quote, went missing in 1926. She found out that her husband asked for a divorce. What she does write is, I worked myself to exhaustion. I forgot to eat. I forgot to sleep. I forgot my name. And that's all she says. She does not talk about it, so I don't talk about it. There are several books that are written about it, some of them fiction, some of them fictionalized conjecture. I have read a bunch of them, and I can't recommend any of them. We do know that not only did she write a letter to her assistant to care for Rosalind, she also wrote a letter to her husband and her brother-in-law. Those two men did not allow the police to see those letters and burned them. So my personal opinion, my conjecture is, it would have been poor form to point out that a gentleman had been stepping out on his wife, so they decided to keep it a secret, and it got out of hand. There were 10 days, it was a huge manhunt. She was where she always was, which was in a spa 180 miles from where her car was left. Yes, we still don't know how she got there. But she was there the whole time. So there are some facts we have. There's conjecture, but we don't know. She was upset, and she needed some time to think, and it just got horribly, horribly out of hand, I think.
We have time for a couple more questions. Are there any more questions?
Yes.
Did I understand correctly, Archie left her because he sort of fell in love with another woman?
Did Archie leave her because he fell in love with another woman? Yes. Major Belcher introduced him to Nancy, and she was a golfer too. She was much younger than he, and Nancy's parents were very opposed to this, obviously. She was having an affair with a married man. They sent her to Europe for a year to try and get over him. She did not. He didn't get over her. They married. Agatha married a man 13 years younger than her and had a very happy marriage. There is some evidence that he may have had a paramour as well, but we don't know what that arrangement was or if it was consensual between the three of them. We don't know. We don't know. Max married a year. He waited a year, and then he married one of the women that had been one of his assistants and his translators on his digs. And then he mysteriously died like 8 months later. But he did die. He did die shortly after her. He died about 18 months after Agatha did. But he was knighted, and Agatha was honored as well. So she was Dame Agatha Mary Clarissa Miller Christie Mallowan, the Lady Mallowan. I would not want to put that on a name tag. But yes, Max did remarry a year later. Anything else?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Deborah, for coming back and coming on short notice.